It is Friday, October 30th, 2020. I'm Pastor Thor Ramsey with Center Church. This is Gospel for Five, where we take 5 minutes out of our day and focus on the gospel and the one who saved our souls, because Jesus is the gospel. So we are in Paul's letter to the Galatians. We've been going line by line. We've been emphasizing the difference between big law Christians and big grace Christians, because Paul's letter to the Galatians is about big grace, not big law. So he says, I went up to the church in Jerusalem 14 years after I had been preaching the gospel to the Gentiles to make sure that I was preaching the same gospel they were preaching. The church is primarily Jewish. That's a Jewish, congregation of believers. I had a Gentile with me, Titus. They didn't force him to be circumcised. So that tells me Jesus plus nothing is the gospel, as we're going to see. And from those who seem to be influential, what they were makes no difference to me. God shows no partiality. This is something amazing about the Apostle Paul. It's like you have James, the brother of Jesus, who was one of the primary elders in the church in Jerusalem. So you can imagine being the brother of Jesus would lend itself to a certain status among Christians. In terms of today, we have Christian celebrities, which is problematic in many respects. But certainly James, the brother of Jesus, had status, and many people probably held him in awe. And Paul's saying, God's not partial. I don't care if you're a king or a peasant. God is not partial. He doesn't treat the rich any differently than he treats the poor. He doesn't treat the poor any differently than he treats the rich. He doesn't treat the blacks any differently than he treats the whites. He doesn't treat any ethnic group differently than any other ethnic group. Did he call people that were ethnic? Yeah, he called the Jews. He created this nation. But the point is this: God's fair in his treatment of everyone. And this value that the West has on individualism really comes from a biblical worldview. Because right here we see that in Christianity, it emphasizes the individual is important to God. Every individual. It doesn't matter who you are. God is not partial. So every individual is important to God. Now, as the West has left God behind, the secular version of this and everything in secular culture really steals their narrative from the Christian worldview. It's just that they leave the Christian worldview behind, but what they do is they leave God behind and steal some of the principles of a Christian worldview, and this is one of them. The individual matters to God, but what do we have now in a perverted, secularized version of that? We have radicalized individualism, where human autonomy is the highest value in our culture. One of the highest values, human autonomy, human independence. No man can tell me what to do. No God can tell me what to do. No one can tell me what to do. I am the master of my own destiny, and how dare you tell me how I should live? How dare you? And this is the whole idea behind a lot of our cultural values today. Radicalized individualism, which lends itself to being separate rather than living in community the way God calls us to live in the community of the local church. So, again, Paul says, what they were makes no difference to me. Right? Why? Because God shows no partiality. Like, they're just human beings like I am. Those, I say, who seemed influential added nothing to me. So again, Paul's emphasizing even someone like James, the brother of Jesus, didn't say, oh, Paul, your message is a little off. Here's what you need to add to it. What was Paul's message? Jesus Christ and him crucified. Paul's message centered on the person and work of Jesus. What? For salvation. It is through what Christ has done that we are saved, by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone, for the glory of God alone. That is the Reformation summary of the gospel, and I believe it's an absolutely biblical summary, whereas this letter again can be summarized: Jesus plus nothing is the gospel. That's why they added nothing to me, Paul says. Now, what has God said to you today?